G'day guys, and welcome to the final episode of the Boundary Riders podcast on this YouTube channel. That is right. We are officially announcing today, guys, that we will be moving the podcast to a brand new YouTube channel, a standalone YouTube channel. It'll be linked down below. So make sure to go subscribe to that because that is where we're going to be posting every single podcast from now on. This will be the final episode of the Boundary Riders podcast that we post on the Boundary Riders YouTube channel. It'll have his very own channel from now on. We'll be putting up posts pretty much every single week announcing the new episode. But if you want to go get notified on the podcast every single week on YouTube, then make sure to go click the link below, subscribe over there because new episodes will be posted every single week on the Boundary Riders podcast YouTube channel. For people on Spotify, nothing will change for you guys. But of course, guys, this is our 100th episode, so we have a lot to announce today, a lot of new stuff, and we will be covering some pre-season news. But first of all, let's roll the brand new Boundary Riders podcast intro. Welcome to the Boundary Riders podcast, your one-stop shop for all your AFL content needs.
He looks at his options, and Jack Ginnivan says, "Boys, you brought me to the club to do just this!"
But this guy has flog written all over him.
From attack down, Reed sprints away from Petrarca, leaves him in his wake, takes a second bounce, takes a third. The sheer arrogance of Harley Reid. Finish the job, young man!
So let's get into the footy news from the week that was. So of course, guys, with today's being episode 100, some things don't change. The fact that my brother isn't here, unfortunately, he couldn't make it here for episode 100, but he should be well and truly here for the regular season. Of course, footy games start pretty shortly. We'll get into that as the episode goes on. But I did want to talk about a couple of things with the channel going into 2025's new season. Now, on the podcast, we do have some new mics that we will be introducing when my brother comes in, so we both have a mic each. I know that's been an issue for a while now with the audio sometimes through the podcast, so that's going to be trying to be fixed as much as possible. But on the live stream front, so my plan is to stream pretty much every game on Thursday night. So we are planning to do the Gold Coast, Brisbane and Collingwood try games that they're going to be doing for the match sims. That's going to be our first live stream back. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you guys the new live stream setup. So this is the new live stream setup for the upcoming season. I really like the way that we've got the ladder. Obviously, this will be updated every single week. The teams down below. I also like the idea of how American sports introduce the win-loss records on the side of the scoreboard. So I thought I'd incorporate that into it this year. I've kind of made it look a little bit different. The face cam's up the top here. I really like the new setup for the live stream. So of course, let me know down below how you feel about the live stream setup going into the season, because I'm super excited for the new season. I wanted to update some things for the 2025 season, and I think it looks super cool. So yeah, going forward, that's what the live stream will look like. And yeah, I'll be trying to set this up as best we can for the try games coming up. I probably won't be able to live stream the Indigenous All-Stars game, unfortunately, but we will be. My plan is to do every single week the Thursday night games because, well, this year I think every single week we have a Thursday night game, which is really cool. So that's my plan going forward this season. Now, of course, you can see down below in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, we do have our footy tipping comp officially up and going. So if you guys download the ESPN Footy Tips app, you will be able to join our tipping comp. Just click the link down below. That's how people have been able to join. And yeah, you guys can join. And of course, the AFL Fantasy League we've had up for a while now. So you guys can join that with that code in the bottom right-hand corner. But I haven't announced it on the podcast yet. But we will be giving a $100 gift voucher to the winner of the Footy Tips comp and the AFL Fantasy comp at the end of the year. So we finally decided of a prize. We just thought a $100 gift voucher would be nice for the winner. So that's our prizes for the upcoming tipping comp and AFL Fantasy comp this year. Now, moving into some other stuff that we're going to be returning this year. Of course, fan favorite segment last year was the Flog of the Week. That will be returning probably next week, if not the week after. And that's pretty much all we've got. So we've got the Thursday streams every single week we're planning on doing. We may do an extra one depending on how schedules go and all that sort of stuff. The review will be returning this year, and we will be starting the review at the end of the match simulation game, so that will be really exciting. I'll be trying, it'll be a little bit different, the first review, probably the second one as well, but of course when the new season starts, we will have the Boundary Riders votes come in every single week. And that's pretty much all I've got for you on episode 100, the introduction, all that sort of stuff. Live stream, got that. Thursday streams, got that. And yeah, the vlog of the week will be returning in the next couple of weeks as well. So super excited for the year, guys. Basically ramping up now as the games are within a week. So super excited for the footy stuff to begin. But let's move into a bit of AFL news. First of all, I saw some information regarding Adam Tomlinson. It does seem that he has met with the West Coast Eagles a potential career season lifeline. He has been playing the scratch matches for North Melbourne, so waiting to see if potentially Adam Tomlinson will be added to an AFL list. He does have a connection with Andrew McWalter, obviously being at the Demons in the past as an assistant, so I'll have to wait and see on that front. But I thought Adam Tomlinson to the West Coast or North Melbourne, I think it's a right fit for either team. So as long as he is fit enough, I think it'd be a great pickup for both of them. Now, an interesting topic that was brought up throughout the week, of course, with the tragic passing of Adam Hunter and Troy Selwood, was the idea of a men's mental health round coming to the AFL. I saw Cinch Footy and a men's mental health page on Instagram called the Shaka Project. I'm not too familiar with how much they do, but I know that they do a lot of work with men's mental health, and they both collaborated on a post saying that it's time for a men's mental health round, and I think it's a great idea. Now, I know politics or social justice stuff really isn't favoured in a lot of scenarios with like rounds and that sort of stuff, but I personally think a men's mental health round would be a great idea. I think that men's mental health is a topic that is starting to be talked about a lot more, but I still think there's a lot more that can be done. And the AFL have a huge audience that they can tap into to get people talking. And I think the AFL could make this a real spectacular event. Like we've seen just things like Gather Round, for Christ's sakes. I mean, that has no political meaning for it, but just how much people get behind it. Sir Doug Nicholls round, of course, how much people get behind that. I think a men's mental health round could be really beneficial to not only men in Australia, but just the AFL itself. I think you could easily structure it that the Danny Frawley game, usually St Kilda play against someone. I think it's Carlton this year they play against, but I think you could easily make that the standalone game, the game that you stand alone, maybe Thursday night, Friday night, make it a huge spectacular event, and then have bunch of games over the weekend that would just, amplify that sort of talking points. I mean, even Anzac round now, Anzac Day is not really Anzac Day anymore. We have a whole round dedicated to, I don't know, what's the word? Showing our respect for soldiers and that sort of stuff and the armed forces and defence force. So I think that a men's mental health round would be a great idea, but I did put a little TikTok up, and I think I put it up on YouTube. So I think it's a super cool idea, and I'd really like for the AFL to push that forward. I don't know if it will happen this year, but potentially in the next year or two, I think that'd be a great idea. Other than that, it looks like Ken Hinkley is probably going to be his last year as coach at Port Adelaide. It does seem, according to a lot of sources, including Mitch Cleary, that Josh Carr is starting as soon as 2026 on a 3-year deal, and looks like that it'll be a succession plan that Josh Carr will take over next year. A lot of people are suggesting that because of obviously the Tasmania team coming in 2028, that they'll probably want to coach in 2027, that Ken Hinkley could be up for that job. You obviously got John Longmire waiting in the wings as well for that job, and people have even mentioned maybe Chris Scott, Nathan Buckley. So there's a lot of options for Tasmania to tap into when looking for a new coach. I'd be interested to see who takes that job. I think that whoever takes it is going to have a very good run of it. I think they'll have a tough couple of years early on, Tasmania, but I think GWS kind of set up the blueprint on how to build a club, I think. Now, I know the Tasmania are going to try and build the team a lot more quicker because they kind of want this team to be successful pretty quickly. So hopefully they don't do what the Gold Coast did, try to manufacture quick success and then inevitably fail. I mean, look, they've had to basically do it all over again nearly twice, really. So let's hope that the Tassie don't fall to that same fate. But that's really what we're looking at the moment on the coaching front. I think a clip will go up. We did talk about the most under pressure coaches in a podcast a while ago. We'll be putting up a clip in, I think it's next week or the week after, if you guys missed that. So you guys can find out what our thoughts are on the most under pressure coaches going into 2025. But it does seem pretty much all but certain now that Port Adelaide will be walking into next season with a brand new coach in Josh Carr. But before we go any further, a message from me. If you guys enjoy the content and you want to see more, then make sure to become a member on the channel today. For just $4 a month, you can get early access to video essays, access to live recording to the Boundary Riders podcast, along with exclusive stream perks and much more. And something that I'm super excited to introduce to channel membership this year is the members vote. Every week with the review, you can cast your vote to have your say on the Boundary Riders medal. So for all that and more, click the link down below, and for the added bonus of getting an extra inch onto your member, then do it now. But anyway, let's get back into the content. Now let's move on and talk about some preseason injury news. Now, we did put up a clip on today's episode, video yesterday, so Tuesday, when you guys watching this. It was about every single club's injury list and injury updates. There is a couple of other things that I did find out. I recorded that on the Monday, came out Tuesday. I'm recording this today on a Tuesday, coming out Wednesday. Hopefully that made sense to at least one of you out there. But I will just quickly update you on a couple of injuries that have been mentioned in the last day or so. And what I'll do after that is I will play the video basically of the injury list for every single club, so you guys can have an idea of what injuries your club has going into the regular season that's coming up. But I quickly want to mention the injury concerns that we have seen in the AFL throughout the week. So at the Brisbane Lions, unfortunately, Kitty Coleman has had an injury setback. At Collingwood, we have Cochrane, Fremantle, Sean Darcy, Gold Coast, Sam Flanders, North Melbourne, Josh Goda, Port Adelaide, Brendan Zerk-Thatcher, St Kilda, Mason Wood, and Jack Sinclair. Although in saying that, it seems like those guys are a little bit more in the clear now, which is good to see. And Alex Pearce for Fremantle has been confirmed to have been ruled out of the Indigenous All-Stars game. So let's quickly just break down a couple of these injuries before we play the clip of every single club's injury list. So Joel Cochrane finished the game early in a match simulation for Collingwood. He's a rookie defender for Collingwood. Probably won't be playing many games early on, but unfortunate for Joel Cochrane that he came off with a heavy knock. Sean Darcy was really unfortunate. He's set to undergo ankle surgery and is going to miss the start of the season. It's really tragic for him because it seemed like he was finally had a great preseason, slimmed right down, was ready to go for the Dockers, and now another injury setback, which is really unfortunate. Now on St Kilda, the scans have confirmed that Max King has avoided serious structural damage to his ACL, while Mason Wood and Jack Sinclair have also avoided serious damage to their injuries. Jack Sinclair was a hamstring, Mason Wood was a quad, so they still haven't announced yet the St Kilda injuries, the severity of them, but at this stage it seems like a little bit on the lesser side. So they may miss the match simulation, may also miss the Community Series game for St Kilda, but I'd expect them to make round one. On Alex Pearce, it's officially been confirmed now that he will miss this weekend's Indigenous All-Stars game due to a minor ankle injury. They haven't ruled out Shea Bolton just yet. He's, at this stage, going to be playing, but we'll have to wait and see on that front. But that's really all the injury news that has came over the past day. So we'll play the clip now of the injury list at every single club. Of course, we'll start with the Adelaide Crows going in alphabetical order. There are a couple of players to take a look at here, although in saying that, it is good news for the Crows as they look like they have a potential full list to pick from for round one. But there is one player to be a bit concerned about, which is Kieran Strachan. There is a couple of injury concerns as he did have foot surgery for a stress fracture in his right foot. The big man has been in a moon boot and he's back to training now. So they are hopeful that he will be ready for the round one clash if he is to be selected. Obviously, Riley O'Brien is in front of him. Other players on the injury list are Luke Pedlar, Welsh, Cumming and Miller. Isaac Cumming and Wayne Miller seem to be cleared, so I wouldn't be too concerned about them if you're a Crows fan. And Luke Pedlar and Welsh, both of them copped a knock to the shoulder in recent weeks and have been out of contact training over the past week or so, but I'd be pretty sure they'd be fine when round one rolls around. I mean, there's still about 3 weeks to go before the season starts, so I wouldn't be too concerned on those two guys. And Isaac Cumming and Wayne Miller seem pretty certain that they will be in round one selection talks for the Crows. So that's good news for them. On the Brisbane Lions, bit of an interesting one, of course. They play in opening round and Coming off the premiership, they would have started their preseason a little bit later. On Lincoln McCarthy and Oscar McInerney, McCarthy seems to be a potential round 0 or opening round option here for the Lions. That would be great news. Oscar McInerney seems to be tracking really well after his injury in the prelim final to his shoulder. So he's going to start ramping up his contact work in the next couple of weeks in a bid to try and get into that round 0 team. I wouldn't think he'd be in match sims. But speaking of match sims though, Levi Ashcroft and Henry Smith, both of them have been a little bit injury ravaged throughout the preseason, but both of them look set to be ready to go when match sims come around for the Lions. That's really good news for them. But a couple of players will be missing round 0, round 1, potentially the first couple of games of the year. Darcy Gardner looks like he's tracking well and is training okay, but he won't be coming under consideration for selection in the first few weeks of the season. So a little bit disappointing. He did miss a lot of last year for the Lions, but he will be there after maybe rounds 2 or 3, I would say. Kitty Coleman looked like he was tracking towards a round 0 starter, but it does seem that he has had a setback with his ACL injury. Nothing too major, but it does seem that he will miss probably until maybe gather round. And same goes for Tom Duday. On to Carlton. Charlie Curnow did have a bit of a scare in the last week or so, but it does seem there was no structural damage, so he should be okay and tracking all right for round 1. And Sam Walsh, after having a hamstring injury in the preseason, he is starting to ramp up his workload this week, which is good signs for him. So hopefully making his bid for round 1. And at this stage, both of them don't seem to be ready for Match Sims or the Amy Community Series game, but keep an eye out for them in round 1 against the Tigers. Blake Acres, Corey Durden, and Matt Cottrell look to be at this stage that they're returning to full duties in the next couple of weeks, so they should be fine to start the season for the Blues. That's good news. Jack Silvani missed all of last year through injury. Seems like good news. He's been training a centre-half back for the Blues, and it looks like he's been playing through the match simulations for Carlton in the intra-club games, so it looks like he'll be ready for the first match sim for the Blues in the next week or so. So that's great news for Jack Silvani. Now, a couple of players have seen nowhere near selection talks in round 1. First, Alex Chin-Cotter. It does seem that Alex Chin-Cotter with a hip issue, so he probably won't be playing for the first few weeks of the season. And Nick Newman unfortunately ruptured his patella in January, so he has been ruled out for the entire season, which is really terrible news for Nick Newman and the Blues. Moving on to Collingwood. Nick Dacos was the big talking point. I think it was just before Christmas or just after Christmas that he had an issue with his plantar fascia, but he has now returned to full training, so he's all good to go. Probably be ready for the match sims, which is really good news for Pies fans. Lockie Sullivan played a few games last year as a mature age recruit. He is recovering from a calf injury, but should be fine for opening round if he is selected for the Pies. Reef McGuinness, Mason Cox, and Tom Mitchell, all unknown as to when they will return. So the Pies are really keeping this under wraps. Reef McGuinness has been a really good contributor in the preseason so far, but unfortunately he's been sidelined over the last few weeks. So we'll have to wait and see on Reef McGuinness. And Tom Mitchell, he's a real question mark. I'd be surprised if he's there in opening round. And unfortunately, the big one for Jordan De Goey, after starting the preseason trying to treat some soft tissue issues in Qatar, and after getting back to full training, unfortunately, he suffered bone bruising on his knee. So I think they're going to take a super cautious approach with Jordan De Goey. I'd be a little bit surprised if he's going to play many games for round 0. Maybe he'll be ready for round 0, but we'll have to wait and see. On Essendon, Darcy Parish and Sam Durham look like they both won't be playing in the match simulations against the Western Bulldogs this week, but should be able to play against Geelong in the Amy Community Series game, which is good news. Jordan Ridley seems to have had a injury setback and will miss the Dogs clash in the match simulation with a hamstring, and pretty unknown at this stage if he'll be ready for round 0. Matt Guelphy was the big sad news. Unfortunately, he's going to need surgery on his hamstring, and he's going to miss at least 10 to 12 weeks. So probably just at the end of the first half of the season, unfortunately for him. Now, Alan Davey underwent knee surgery after a promising pre-season. He's potentially be back to training in the next 2 to 4 weeks. I'd be a little bit surprised if he's going to be back for round 0 because they play against the Gold Coast. So keep your eye on Alan Davey, but I'd be surprised if he's in the first couple of weeks. I think he'll probably be out. Good news though for the Bombers. Jai Caldwell and Ben Mackay have had some injury concerns over the off-season, but set to be ready when the campaign begins. And a couple of young guys, Archer Day-Wicks, Jaden Newen, and Zach Johnson, have not been in contact work at training so far, so a little bit unknown as to when they'll be returning for the Bombers. On Fremantle, a couple of interesting ones. First is Shea Bolton, suffered a minor calf strain in training last week, placing him in some doubt for the Indigenous All-Stars game, so we'll have to wait and see on that front. Teammate Hayden Young was also ruled out with a low-grade hamstring strain, so he won't be playing in the match simulation. Potentially will be playing in the Community Series game, but more likely I think they'll just leave him out and play him in round one. Sean Darcy seemed to have finally got back to some consistency in the preseason, lost a lot of weight, but unfortunately in training last week had a setback, and it doesn't look like he'll be playing for the first couple of rounds of the season. So that's really unfortunate for Sean Darcy. A couple of others here. Alex Pearce, there's been a little bit of concerns if he's going to be playing in the Indigenous All-Stars game. I think he'll play. There's been some doubt over him, but at this stage, I think an ankle issue won't keep him out of that game. And Quinton Narkle and Brendan Walker, a little bit of unknowns as to if they will be okay, but at this stage, I think both of them will be up for selection when round one rolls around. So good news for Fremantle. On the Cats, haven't had many injury concerns over the off-season. The real big one is Cam Guthrie. Only played 10 games last year, dealing with a toe and Achilles issues, and at training last week was restricted to kicking with teammates before heading off the track. So I'd be very surprised if Cam Guthrie is around the mark when round 0 rolls around, or round 1. I think he'll be waiting till maybe early in the season, but again, it's a little bit unknown. The Cats tend to not tell too much when it comes to injury concerns, and Toby Conway underwent surgery mid-July with a stretch fracture in his foot. Hasn't been spotted at training last week, and Geelong have really provided no update on him either, so a little bit of an unknown there on Toby Conway. On the Gold Coast, the real concern at the moment is Sam Flanders. He's had a back complaint, and although he's been running pretty strongly, he's unable to do any contact work. So a little bit of an unknown if he's going to be ready for opening round. They do think that it'll be okay as long as he can get through training over the next month or so. I would be pretty surprised if he plays in match sims or community series games. Good news though is the recruit from the Tigers and Dan Rioli probably won't be ready to go for the match simulation, but seems all but certain to be playing against the Sydney Swans in the AAMI Community Series. And same goes for Will Graham. He's on the way back from a hamstring injury and should be able to integrate into the main group for training in the coming weeks, and may play match sim, but more likely community series games for him. On the Giants, they are pretty hopeful that Josh Kelly will feature in the match simulations in the next week or so that's good news. Same kind of story goes for Kieran Briggs. Had an operation on his knee across the break and most likely will return to full duties pretty soon, and both of them should be available for practice matches. Steve Cornelio should be returning in the coming weeks following shoulder surgery, but the club is yet to determine if he'll feature in any of the scratch matches. So probably not going to be risks if I'm the Giants. So probably round 0, maybe round 1 in the early rounds for him. Toby Bedford is returning from a quad issue, is back on the track and should be okay for opening round. That's good news. And that's pretty much all we got for the Giants. So we move on to Hawthorn. Unfortunately, it does seem Mitch Lewis and James Blank, the both of them, won't be featuring at least for the first half of 2025. So wouldn't be expecting them returning to the Hawks lineup until after the buys at this stage. Cal Shadir is working back after a stress reaction in his back and is facing a delayed start to the season. So a little bit unknown at this stage with Cal Shadir, but probably the first third of the season you won't be seeing him on the field. James Sicily and Will Day have both recovered from the off-season surgery and are set to play practice matches. So really good news for James Sicily. Hasn't been seen a lot on the track, but that's good news for the Hawks. Sam Frost is building his conditioning after recovering from a stress fracture in his foot. So that's really good to see. You'd expect him to play in community series games or the match sims. And Connor McDonald and Jai Newcomb have had a little bit of issues over the last week or so. Jai Newcomb had a corked thigh from their training camp, and Connor McDonald had a little bit of an ankle issue, but that's not going to keep them out of match simulations. They'll both be fine. On Melbourne, a really tough injury for Colton Tholstrup. Everyone thought that he was going to be one of the big risers for the Demons this year, but unfortunately he's going to miss at least 10 to 12 weeks after scans revealed a bone stress issue, which is really unfortunate for him, while rookie forward in Luca Kentfield is facing a delayed start to the season after a lengthy stint in the hospital with complications with pneumonia. Jake Melsham suffered a hamstring tear last week with no timeline on his return. But let's move to some good news for the Demons. So Christian Petrarca is nearing a return to full fitness after recovering from a cracked rib he suffered at training. Max Gawn has rejoined the main group after spending the past 6 weeks with no contact work after fracturing his voice box, so that's good news. Jake Lever has also returned to full training after off-season shoulder and knee surgery. Cade Chandler and Judd McVie, a little bit on modified trainings at this stage, but expect to do full contact work the next week or so. So I'd be expecting they're going to be playing match sims. Other than a couple of injury concerns with a couple of young guys and Jake Melksham, seems like the Demons will be picking from a pretty full list going into round 1. North Melbourne. George Wardlaw, of course, is the unlucky story, suffering a high-grade hamstring strain. He's probably going to be missing the majority of the first half of the season, so that's really unfortunate for him. He looked like he was going to be growing into something big. In better news, though, Aiden Court, Will Dawson, have been rejoining the main group in the past week or so after undergoing off-season surgery, so it's really good news. It's also hoped that Josh Gota will be fit for the start of the season after suffering a ruptured Achilles last year. And Braden George could be fit for the start of the season as well, as he's recovered from his ACL injury, which he sustained last year. Callum Coleman-Jones, unfortunately, is set to miss the majority of the first half of the season as he's still recovering from his Achilles injury. But overall, pretty decent news for a lot of the North Melbourne players. But of course, the tragic story of George Wardlaw and Cal Coleman-Jones still are big issues that won't be in selection talks early for the season for North. On to Port Adelaide. Sam Powell-Pepper seems all but ready to be integrated into the main group in 2025 after suffering an ACL injury last year. Powell-Pepper is still in non-contact work, but is expected to resume full training in the next week or so, and then should be up for selection in round one, which is great news. Missed him a lot last year, Port Adelaide. Kane Farrell missed last season's final series with a hamstring injury, but he's fully recovered now. He started to join intra-club match simulations in the last week or so. So has Ivan Soldo. So both of them will be up for selection. If both of them are up for selection, Kane Farrell, I think, will definitely be in their best 22. Ivan Soldo, maybe not so much. Willem Drew did have a bit of an injury concern just after Christmas, I believe, with a plantar fascia, but it seems like he's going to be resuming running in the coming days. He'll be playing at least one preseason game, probably the Community Series game, I would imagine. And Joe Berry suffered a poke to the eye last week on light duties, but that's not going to keep him out from a debut early in the season. Todd Marshall, he's taken his first few steps in following his surgery on his ruptured Achilles tendon. Maybe in the second half of the year, Todd Marshall will return, but I highly doubt it for Port. Now, the Tigers have had a pretty tough pre-season in terms of injuries. Of course, a lot of younger players probably aren't really ready to the rigors of pre-season training. The quintet of ACL injuries, which include Judson Clark, McKelty Lafau, Tyler Young, Josh Gibcus, and Taj Houghton, remain some way off of returning. It does seem that Judson Clark is the earliest to return, sometime in April. Josh Gibcus had a little bit of an injury setback, and he won't be ready till probably after 6 rounds into the season. And Tyler Young, Lafau, and Houghton seem very unlikely to be early in the season. There's a little bit of an unknown with those three guys. Tom Lynch did suffer a concussion when in training last week, but I'd expect that if he's not going to play in match sims, he'll most likely play in the Community Series games. Josh Smiley did suffer a minor hamstring injury during match simulation, and maybe an outside chance to feature in the practice matches. But overall, I think he'll be ready when round one rolls around. I think he'll get a debut pretty early on. On the Saints, they've had a horror run during the off-season. The big talking points so far are Dougal Howard and Mateus Filippo. Both of them are set to miss at least a few months of the season. Better news on Rowan Marshall. It is expected that he will play round one, along with Hunter Clark. They seem like to be going pretty well. Liam Henry's a bit of a 50-50 chance for round one. We'll just have to wait and see on his front. Alex Toro seems to be continuing his recovery from his back issue. A little bit of an unknown at this stage. And it seems that Paddy Dowd's going to be missing pretty much the majority of the first couple of rounds of the season following surgery from a serious infection. Paddy Dow, a bit of an unknown at this stage, but I'd be expecting him in the early rounds. On to the Swans. Logan McDonald is the big talking point. It is a bit of uncertain if he will be ready to start the season following his post-season ankle surgery. He is yet to resume full training at this stage, and the club is saying that he has been delayed, but not providing any clear output as to when he will return. I'd think in the early rounds we'll see Logan McDonald, but he may not play an opening round or the first couple of games. We'll have to wait and see. Hayden McLean has only recommenced training this week after managing his groin issue that he's had over the off-season. I think Hayden McLean may be a wait and see. I'd expect him to be ready for the Community Series games, if not maybe round 0. Personally, I think that Sydney may take the cautious approach here. I think that Hayden McLean's a very important player for the Swans. And then a couple of younger guys for the Swans. Draftee and Jesse Totoli is resuming running in the next 2 to 4 weeks, along with Will Edwards and Jake Buller. Probably the next month or so they'll be resuming full training. Will Edwards, on the other hand, probably misses the first half of the season, as he did fracture his leg last December, so I wouldn't be expecting him for the first half of the season for Sydney. But overall, they have a pretty good injury list at this stage for Swans. On West Coast, of course, the massive news of Dom Sheed will miss the entirety of the 2025 season after rupturing his ACL, so it's really unfortunate for the Premiership hero. We also have Elliot Yeo. He's going to miss the first month of the season. Harley Reid has been managed with a sore ankle, with a bit of a stop-start sort of summer, along with Jake Waterman, who's missed recent training sessions through back soreness, but both of them should be returning to full training in the next week or so. Maybe ready for match sim, but we'll have to wait and see. Same goes for Liam Baker. Seems like he's back in full training now. He had a bit of an ankle scare, but he'll be ready for match sims, I'd imagine. Callum Jamieson is rehabilitating after ankle and knee operations last year. Very much an unknown. Same goes with Rhett Bazzo as to when they will be returning. And Campbell Chesser has endured an interrupted pre-season with lower leg issues, but is now ramping up his program. So it's still a little bit unknown with Chesser, but he looks like he's more likely to be close to the early rounds for the Eagles for selection. And finally, we get to the Western Bulldogs. Liam Jones and Jason Johannesson, some of the bigger injury concerns. They'll be out for at least a couple of months due to high-grade hamstring strains. And Liam Jones is arguably one of the better defenders in the comp right now, so that's really unfortunate for the Western Bulldogs, which is kind of their weaker line. Adam Treloar endured several calf strains, and he's going to have a delayed start to the season. So first time All-Australian last year, Adam Treloar was been really important for the Bulldogs. Of course, they've lost a couple of players, a couple of depth players, and now Adam Treloar is out, so that's really unfortunate for them. Good news though, it does seem that Aaron Norton and Cody Waitman, even though they've been on modified programs, both contributed in the recent intra-club game and look set for round one. Maybe playing the community series games, those two, but they seem certain to be playing in round one. And it does seem that Anthony Scott is a little bit of a 50-50 if he will be ready for round one, suffering a kneecap injury, which is really unfortunate. Nick Caulfield also in a race against time. Jamara Ugle-Hagan is still been away from the club, dealing with personal issues, and doesn't seem clear when he's going to return. So I'd be very surprised if Jamara is anywhere near the first couple of rounds for selection for the Bulldogs. And finally, Tim English. Doesn't look like he's got too many concerns. There was a little bit of issues with the abdominal strains, but he looks certain and ready to go for the Bulldogs as the season rolls around. So that's good news for the Bulldogs. But guys, that's basically all we have for the injury list going over the season. So hopefully a lot of those players will be fine for their first game of the season. But at this stage, it seems that we've had a lot of injuries over this pre-season. So I just wanted to give you guys a quick recap about how all the teams are going on the injury front. And finally, guys, I wanted to take a look at the pre-season. So we've been doing this every single week as well for about 2 months now, looking at pre-season information at every single club, trying to find out who's performing really well, positional changes, and just upcoming information regarding the pre-season, how your team is going. Now, Nerds for Life, I've mentioned him a couple of times on the podcast. He's been able to compile nearly, I think, every single club, their match simulation games, posting it all over the place, getting the real information that everyone wants to know about. So thank you for him, like truly. Like he's been keeping this preseason knowledge just pushing out further and further because you don't really see it anywhere else. Like David King every now and then will post some information about a club that he went to for one afternoon, but the fact that Nerds for Life over on Facebook, I know he's posted on TikTok, he focuses on Supercoach, but I mean, you can basically read this information for anything really, AFL Fantasy, Supercoach, even if you just want to know about how your team's going pre-season. Yeah, he's got it all. So we'll start with Carlton. Sam Doherty seems to be training with the defenders since Newman's injury. Looks like he's going to be regaining his half-back role. So I mean, we've seen him do so well back there. I think he's All-Australian 1 year as a halfback, Sam Doherty. So I'd think that he's going to be going back there now with the Nick Newman injury, just a little bit more assurity back there. Speaking of the halfback role, Ollie Hollands, he's been training back there all summer, and it seems that he's going to continue doing that even though Sam Doherty's going to be moving back there. So that's great news for him. Jesse Mollop has had a really impressive summer period with Matt Owies moving to the West Coast Eagles. He looks like the one to take over the Matt Owies role as the small forward for the Blues. Jagger Smith seems to be dominating during the match simulations at the moment. A lot of CBAs for him, so looks like he may be walking into the midfield role for the Blues early on, which would be interesting because they've got a lot of midfielders around that mark. You've got, obviously, the Cripps, Walsh, Chera, Akers has had a little bit of an injury concern, but I think he'll be fine for round one. But same with Sam Walsh. But it does seem that Jagger Smith could get some early midfield minutes at the start of the season, which would be interesting for the Blues. On Charlie Curnow, he has returned to training and showing positive signs since his surgery. There was a little bit of an injury concern, but he should be fine, I think, when round one rolls around. Same goes with Sam Walsh. He's progressing nicely. On the Bulldogs, Matthew Kennedy had a solid game in Match Sim. Seems like to be one of their best, but Riley Sanders in the latest intra-club game was brilliant, was one of the best on the ground. Seems to be in the hierarchy of the midfield rotation, Riley Sanders. Matthew Kennedy probably just slides behind him, but that's really good news, especially with Adam Treloar being injured, that those guys are ready to go. Now, Jess Buzzlinger. This guy is a defender for the Western Bulldogs. He's been behind the mark for quite a while now. Was highly touted as a good defender when coming through the draft. Hasn't been able to play a game, but it does seem that he's a round one bolter for the Bulldogs now that Liam Jones is injured and is going to missing a few months. Now, Riley Garcia really impressed playing up forward, but also rotated in the midfield. The Bulldogs made an effort when it got to the off-season in 2024 to keep him because Port Adelaide had some interest in him, but it did seem that but he wanted to stay at the Bulldogs. He signed a new deal, so it looks like he'll be around the mark trying to get into some early games for the Dogs. And Ed Richards looks like he's going to lock down a midfield role this year for the Dogs after being predominantly a halfback for his first couple of his last few years. He did move into the midfield last year for the Dogs, but now it looks like he's a mainstay in midfielder. On Melbourne, looks like Harvey Langford. He was the top draftee for the Demons. Seems like he's been getting huge raps from these senior Melbourne players. Jack Viney had this to say about him. Once he kind of gets his feet at AFL level and picks up the speed and gets the speed of it, a few craft points here and there, he's going to be a real menace at AFL level. So that's, I think, great kudos from great signs that a senior player like Jack Viney is giving him such high praise early on. Now, Christian Petrarca, he's moved back into the training schedule for the Demons. Isn't doing contact work at the moment, so I don't think he'll play match sim. Be surprised on Community Series game. I think he'll be there around round one, though. Jake Lever is still with the rehab group, but he does seem to be progressing quite nicely for the Demons, so I think he'll be fine. Ed Langdon seemed to have got a little bit of CBA action. I'd be surprised if he's in the guts for the Demons. I think he'll be left on the wing, to be honest. But, I mean, it's interesting that he's got a little bit of another bow to his repertoire, I guess. Xavier Lindsay spent quite a lot of time in the recent match sim on the wing. Wasn't a great game from him, but used it quite well. Clayton Oliver, knock on wood, Neds for Life has said that he says that he's back to his best. I don't want to believe it just yet, but if Clayton Oliver's back to his best, the Demons can have a decent season at the very least. Harvey Langford looked to play well in the recent match sim as a inside mid. Was very good and had a good impact up forward, so that's good news if he can pinch it up forward, especially for the Demons. They've really struggled up there the last couple of years. Trent Rivers played pretty much all day as a midfielder. Seems that he's going to be locked into that midfield core for the Demons this year, which I think is really good because I think he adds a little bit of a point of difference compared to Petrarca, Oliver and Viney. So I think that's good news for him. Max Gawn seems to be rucking once again after having an injured larynx, speech box or whatever. Max Gawn's back to full training now. Competed quite well against Tom Campbell. And finally, Harry Sharp seems to have really impressed at his new club in match simulations. So that's good on the Demons' point of view. Onto the Gold Coast. Matt Rowell seems to have played predominantly midfield this year. That's what Damien Hardwick is saying. But they do expect him to rest up forward at times. So I think they're going to try and take him away from being just that grunt force midfielder and occasionally just shove him up forward to try and give him a bit of a rest, which I think is a good sign. And I don't know, to me, I don't know if this is just me, but I feel like Matt Rowell could be a decent forward. He's such a grunt worker. He'll tackle all day. I can just see Matt Rowell getting a couple of holding the balls inside the forward 50. Not really known as a goal scorer though, so he'll definitely have to add that to his game. But I don't mind the move on the Gold Coast. Connor Butterick has been the big standout at halfback for the Suns in this off-season, continuing to have good match simulations, and he's trying to lock down a spot in that defensive 50 this year for the Suns. There's just so many people trying to get in there, though, so it's going to be tough for him, but he's showing all the good signs that he needs to at this stage. Dan Rioli's tracking very nicely and should be available for the second match simulation. He could be ready for the first one, but against the Brisbane Lions and the Pies, but at this stage, I'd almost lock him in for the game against Sydney. So Dan Rioli, nearly all but certain to be ready for opening round. Lockie Weller seems to be trading with the midfield group as a winger. So missed pretty much the majority of last year through injury. So if Lockie Weller can return and come as a wingman, I think that's great all around for the Suns. On Collingwood, just one little bit of information here on Harry Perryman. Had another game in the midfield and playing a lot of CBAs, but seems that he may have a tagging role for the Pies this year. So interesting because we've obviously seen a lot of teams in the last few years try to reinvent midfielders as taggers. We've seen James Jordan for the Swans, Toby Bedford for the Giants. So maybe Harry Perryman's going to be moving into a role for Collingwood, playing as a tagger or a defensive role player. So that'll be interesting there for the Pies. On North Melbourne, the big talking point at the moment is Tom Powell. Seems to be improving his running, but more importantly is trying to keep his muscle. Always been seen as quite a stringy character, I would say. Very lanky, but at this stage looks like he is trying to bulk up, but also keep his fitness, which is good to see. And in the recent match sim, Tom Powell was CBAs all day. Was locked into that midfield core. Had a good start to the season last year for North Melbourne, but I think this year he's ready to explode once again. Will Phillips seems to have played quite well in the recent match simulation, but of course George Wardlaw is out, so there is a spot there for him, but he just has to lock it down. Colby McKercher, interesting one here. He played absolutely everywhere on the recent match simulation. He's been doing that all summer, but he isn't playing at halfback very often. Looks like he's playing more half forward to wing, as Caleb Daniel seems to be locking down that role at halfback. So if you're looking at McKercher as a fantasy player or a super coach player, just a little bit of caution, because if he is playing as a half forward, for North Melbourne, that's great. He's using the ball in a lot more dangerous areas. But does that mean he's going to get a lot of the ball? I'm not quite sure. So just keep your eye on him. Jai Simpkin started at half forward in the recent match simulation, but then moved to the wing. Finn O'Sullivan played on the wing as well, had a strong performance. And it looks like Robert Hansen Jr. appears to be one of the main forward options this year for North Melbourne, but did also push up the ground. So North Melbourne have kind of struggled to find a small forward. You can think of maybe Paul Curtis, but I feel like he's more of a medium size. Same with Cam Zerha. So I think that Robert Hansen Jr. is the option as a small pressure forward, which is what they've been looking for North. On Sydney, Cal Mills has been dominating the preseason. When Dean Cox was asked where Cal Mills is going to be playing this year, he said a good part about Cal is he's played 7 games last year and he was injured for most of them. He's had a really good preseason and he's played some great footy. But when you're talking about a best and fairest and all-Australian as a midfielder, they didn't have last year. He'll be spending the time straight back in the midfield. So obviously Dean Cox saying that this guy was a all-Australian best and fairest winner as a midfielder. That's where he's going to be playing in 2025, which is great news for the Swans, I think. James Rowbottom has been a brilliant defensive midfielder for the Swans, but I think if they can add Cal Mills in there as well to help him out and help the Swans on the defensive sides of midfield play with tackling, with not so much tagging. I'm not talking about tagging, but if he can play a little bit more of a defensive role, keeping an eye on players like, big midfielders in the game, you're thinking Nick Dacos, Paddy Cripps and that, going one-on-one. That means it releases players like Isaac Heaney, Chad Warner, Errol Goulden to do the stuff that they need to do. That's pretty much on the Swans, pretty much all we've got to say at this stage. But Cal Mills, locked in midfielder. So if you are looking AFL Fantasy Supercoach-wise, Cal Mills, you basically lock in at this point. On Port Adelaide, Jason Horne-Francis in the recent match simulation solely played as a midfielder with no forward time. Now, Ken Hinkley has wanted Jason Horne-Francis to play as a straight midfielder throughout this whole year. He has said that he doesn't know if his tank is ready for it, but I think that Ken Hinkley is going to chuck him in the deep end and say, you play in the midfield, we need you there. So Jason Horne-Francis looks like he's locked in as a straight midfielder this year. Jace Burgoyne switched back to that wing, but also played a little bit of half-back in the recent match simulation. Hasn't been used there much this preseason, which is a bit of a surprise because we saw how well he was in that semi-final. But at this stage, I don't know if he's going to be taking that role because Josh Sin and Kane Farrell didn't play in their match simulation. So Jace Burgoyne, I think, is going to be playing off the wing for Port Adelaide this year, not so much half-back. I think that's going to be taken by Sin and Farrell. On the West Coast Eagles, surprise duo seem to be getting a midfield boost for the Eagles this year. Jack Hutchinson and Tom Gross seem to be pushing into the midfield for the West Coast this year. So Jack Hutchinson played a few games last year, played predominantly as a forward. Now Tom Gross is a mid-season draftee from last year. Seems to have really done well this preseason and looking to try and push into that midfield. Of course, with Elliot Yeo being out, Dom Sheed out as well. A couple of younger guys trying to push into the midfield. Harley Reid didn't participate in the recent match simulation, but trained on the sidelines. He's had a bit of an up and down off season, so unknown how Harley Reid's going to go for the start of the season, but I would hopefully imagine that he would push on through as the season goes on. Elijah Hewitt was playing for the A team for the West Coast Eagles in the recent match sim and had all CBA action, was fantastic. Rotated forward a little bit, but 70-30% forward. So I think Elijah Hewitt's going to have a big year. He's been ravaged by injury for the first couple of years of his career, but was a high draft pick, high prospect. I think he's going to be playing a lot of midfield. Jack Graham started in the midfield in the A team and had a great game. This role that saw him finish second in the Richmond Best and Fairest a couple of years ago, and also when they were playing finals. So I think West Coast are going to use him predominantly as a midfielder. Bit of a watch, keep your eye on as well if you're an AFL fantasy person or Supercoach watcher. He is a midfield forward, so you could maybe use Jack Graham as the year pans out, see how he goes in the match sim and that. But Jack Graham, keep your eye on. Liam Baker was best on ground in the recent match sim, played across half-back, played absolutely brilliantly. Showed a bit of signs of that at Richmond every now and then, that he's able to accumulate the ball when he's a good user, but never really got that role because Dan Rioli was back there, Jaden Short. Looks like Liam Baker's going to be playing halfback for the West Coast Eagles. Great news on his front. So like Jack Hutchinson, like I said, played midfield all day for the Eagles, so that's good news there. And Archer Reid was very impressive. Will push for a spot in the side this year. Looks like he's going to be fighting for Matt Flynn, who, by the way, was playing for the B team for the West Coast Eagles in the recent match sim. It looked like that Archer Reid and Bailey Williams were the A prospects for the West Coast Eagles for them. So that's interesting on that front. We'll have to wait and see how they play that out, the West Coast Eagles. Next, we'll move to the Adelaide Crows. Just a quick one. James Peatling continuing to dominate match simulation. Obviously recruited from the Giants last year. Didn't get much of a go in that midfield group because there's just so many midfielders for the Giants that were in front of him. Played a lot as the sub as well, but James Peatling looking ready to rise at his new club in the Crows. It looks like he's going to be locked into the midfield as well. Finally, on Fremantle, Luke Jackson. I think he's a really big look at for AFL Fantasy and AFL Supercoach because of the recent news of Sean Darcy's injury. But you have to wait and see here. Luke Jackson in the recent match simulation without Sean Darcy played in the midfield, started in the midfield, but not as a ruckman. He started as a midfielder. Now, we've seen him play as like a ruck rover for Fremantle at times and has done okay at that role. He did play well as a ruck rover, but also played in the ruck, and I think that's where his role is as a ruckman. But there is talk that maybe Reedy is an option for Fremantle to play as the ruckman and then Luke Jackson to play as a midfielder/forward. So just keep your eye out on that for Fremantle. And finally, Matt Johnson looked brilliant in the midfield. He's bulked up in the off-season. Him and Neil Erasmus. A lot of the senior guys, Caleb Sarong, Andrew Brayshaw, been singing the praises of players like Johnson and Erasmus and O'Driscoll. So great news on that front for Fremantle. But guys, that's pretty much all we've got for this episode of the podcast. But footy is back. The match simulations start up this week. On Saturday, February the 15th, in the afternoon, we have the Western Bulldogs up against Essendon at Whitten Oval. On Saturday night, we have the Indigenous All-Stars up against Fremantle at Optus Stadium. On Monday, February the 17th, we have West Coast up against Richmond at Mineral Resources Park. On Monday at 2 p.m, we have Geelong against Hawthorn down in Geelong. Thursday, February the 20th, we have the Gold Coast Brisbane Collingwood matchup. That is at the Gold Coast home ground, and that is the game we will be live streaming on the channel. On Friday, February the 21st, we have the Swans up against GWS at Tramway Oval at 10 a.m. At 5:30 p.m, we have the Crows up against Port Adelaide in Mount Barker. And on Saturday, February the 22nd, we have Carlton up against St Kilda at Icon Park at 11 a.m. And then North Melbourne up against Melbourne at Arden Street, same time, 11 a.m. But guys, that is the end of the Boundary Riders podcast, episode 100. Thank you so much for all your support over the first 100 episodes of the podcast. And continuing on from now, new podcast channel, link down below. Make sure to go subscribe down there, guys. But again, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And we'll catch you all next week.